Thank you for joining For Our Special Kids, where we openly and honestly discuss the magic and the mess of raising a child with special needs. We are thrilled to have you here and hope this time provides you with some wonder and wisdom. I'm your host, Jennifer Lansing. Let's get started. Well, I am feeling better. My voice is almost 100%. However, it was not a good voice day when I did this recording, so please forgive me for that. I am so happy I recorded this episode when I did, though, because I cannot explain to you how thrilled I am to get this information out. Every single person listening can benefit from this information, and I'm not talking about just our kids benefiting. Every single person. I was going to break this episode into 2 segments, but truthfully, I didn't want you to have to wait another week to hear the end of our conversation. So yes, it is over 50 minutes, and I hope you listen to the end, where Tapley provides us with some pretty incredible success stories. Now, this episode has a lot of science, but please don't let that deter you either. Tapley Holland provides us with his kind of woo-woo-y story of how this idea and his company, TruDOSE, were born. He walks us through how platelets function in our body, and most likely it is not what you think. He talks about how his company provides a different form of platelet-rich plasma, or PRP. And our discussion does go into detail regarding inflammatory loops, kind of like a platelet reset, our own body's healing process, and a lot more. Please note there are a few moments when Tapley is telling his story and he gets a little choked up. Unlike me, who simply lets out the tears, he kept it together, but he did need some longer pauses. I took some of those out, but truthfully, I wanted to leave in a few of them so that you could feel how deeply emotional his treatment, his story, and the people he's treating really are for him. I will list the paper that Tapley mentions in the show notes. And if you'd like to see some of the visuals he references, it did get a little confusing, please send me an email at jen@forOurSpecialKids.com and I'll send those visuals over to you. Finally, we will be bringing Tapley back onto the show and possibly some of his patients or parents and caregivers to share their experiences with TruDOSE. As always, I hope you enjoy and let me know what you think. I am with Tapley Holland, who is the creator of the TruDOSE technology, a patented intelligent software testing platform that solved the long-standing dosing inaccuracy problem within the field of regenerative medicine. This technology led to uncovering the healing benefits of infusing dose-specific platelets back into the bloodstream, otherwise known as TruDOSE IV platelet therapy. Since 2018, the TruDOSE technology and IV therapy has treated, and get this, reversed thousands of patients with unsolvable symptoms and disease conditions. Okay. Welcome to the show, Tapley. Here's the deal. I'm just going to say this right off the bat. As a parent of a child that has extra special needs, I am always looking and looking and looking and looking. And I've said before, and I know that I will say this again, I never want to look back and say, well, why didn't I? Why didn't I research more for teal? Why didn't I know more for teal? Why didn't I dig deeper for teal? This, that, etc. It's never ending for parents like us. The search is always for the next best thing. And I'm a little scared right now, and my heart's really pumping. I forgot to warn you, I cry all the time. Because from what I've researched and heard, this truly seems like the very next best thing. So that's very scary as a parent. And I'm sorry to just start this interview with tears, but there's a lot riding on your answers to some of my questions. So I'm really, really excited that you're here. And I'd like to start with just some definitions so that we're all on the same page. So regenerative medicine, stem cells, platelet-rich plasma, platelets in general. Can you just give us like a mini anatomy lesson just for people that are listening? So we're kind of at a starting level.
Yeah.
Sorry if I made you cry. Sorry.
No, I can, I know why you're crying, because that fear is hope when you're dealing with something that you may have to live with, and you don't know why. The prospect of hope is scary.
Absolutely.
And I know that. One of my 5 kids is the reason that inspired me to do all this. But to level set everybody, when we think of regenerative medicine, I'm only going to be talking about cells that are from you. So these are autologous-based therapies. Autologous meaning auto, meaning self, from you. When you have, and also there's therapies that are allogeneic. Allo meaning, from someone else. So allogeneic stem cells, usually come in a bottle. Usually they're not from you. Those are things you can get at different centers outside the U.S. and you can get them in the U.S. Then you have bone marrow derived stem cells, which are from you. That is my background. That is my expertise. And then you have things like umbilical cord stem cells, which can be allogeneic or from you. But what we're going to be talking about is autologous-based regenerative medicine. In this case, platelet-rich plasma. Those are cells derived from your blood. But for today's, the TruDOSE, all we're going to be talking about are things from your blood. And the reason it's so powerful is because platelet-rich plasma was the first regenerative therapy that really came onto the scene, period. It's safe. It's your blood. There's really no stem cells inside of it per se that can turn into different tissues.
So stem cells, the efficacy of stem cells varies widely.
Yeah.
And so some people respond and some people don't. Let's talk about platelets. So we've all been taught us that platelets are for clotting. That's so not true, correct? You have really opened our eyes through the podcast that I've listened to and the research that I've looked at to the functionality of platelets. So let's talk about that and then how that helped you transition into what your TruDOSE technology is about. And by the way, we have to talk about the dream because we're a little science and we're a little woo-woo here. So after we go there, we've got to talk about how you got this download of information.
All right. I mean,
so fun. Okay.
No, I love because I love that part of the story because I can't take full credit for coming up with this. But you brought up the efficacy on these therapies. Listen, none of us would argue that these therapies, that we were inherently created and given the God-given ability to heal ourselves. This is how we were created. The literature, whether it's PRP, whether it's bone marrow stem cells, it doesn't matter what the regenerative application. You can find literature on applications that you want to that says overwhelmingly these therapies work. You can find testimonials that says overwhelmingly these therapies work. You can find your friends who say it worked for me, but you can also find literature friends and the like that say, no, it didn't work at all. I had no effect. And why is that? Why does that even exist? That is the problem that I fundamentally solved, which is there's a dosing and accuracy problem. It's something that's very counterintuitive to the scientific world because it's not a medicine. It's not a pharmaceutical. You don't metabolize it. So the idea that that dosing needs to really be looked at is counterintuitive. And what I said is, no, actually, I got to see over 20 years of how these therapies do work and don't work, and just boots on the ground, front lines. And I simply asked the question, what dose will heal what condition? Because we're all biologically different. And if we do the same thing to everybody, which is how we do these therapies, and we're all biologically different, then should we expect us all to have the same outcome success? And you're shaking your head no. And until I pose the question like that, really, you're like, you know what? Now that you frame the question like that, that makes complete sense.
It's so simple, right? You're like,
right?
Hello.
I'm like, well, that's how we've studied these therapies. That's how we execute them every day for the past 4 decades. And we are still no closer to getting to the understanding of what our bodies can really heal. I solved that with the TruDOSE and said, if we can test ourselves and determine biologically where we are right now, and then we can use software to produce a personalized therapy that's dose specific for the condition, would it impact the effectiveness? And it did. It overwhelmingly did. And when I started with the therapy, even though my experience was a lot with stem cells and bone marrow derived stem cells, I said, we can't start with stem cells because it would just make people's heads explode. I mean, it's just very chunky. It's very difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
I said, we need to talk about, we need to be doing things with blood. It's very easy. There's literature support it overwhelmingly. It's not a debate. And so I started with PRP and I said, we should be fixing things that people can understand. So when I started with the TruDOSE technology, I said, let's start with make my hair grow, make my knee feel better. And overwhelmingly, I can show you pictures. It'll make your hair grow. If you do it at the right dose, it'll make your hair grow the first time.
Okay, but I'm really concerned. I don't want certain places to grow hair.
I'm talking about just injecting because injecting it in your head.
So at this point in your evolution, you're still looking at injecting to a location.
Right.
Okay, so different than what you're doing now with the IV. Okay, so originally you're looking at putting it into the scalp where the hair follicles are and regenerating hair, or like Tiger Woods did in his knee. Like, okay, yeah, put it directly into the knee and let the cells go there and work their magic. Yes?
Exactly, because at this point, we're talking 2018. That I knew that bone marrow derived stem cells, umbilical cord stem cells could be infused intravenously back into your vein. I knew that, but my mind wasn't even there. I wasn't trying to solve that problem. Again, I was trying to solve the problem of we need to level set the whole playing field of regenerative medicine in general. And to do that, we have to start with the most simplest thing and the thing that everybody knows and understands universally, and that is PRP. So I started with PRP. Because if I can solve that problem, then I can work towards bone marrow, then I can work towards umbilical cord and so forth and so on. So I said, let's start with make my knee feel better, make my hair grow. And it did. Overwhelmingly, there's no need to go back for multiple treatments like we do now. It's like, hey, well, the second, third treatment didn't work. Well, maybe let's give you a fourth and fifth. No, if you do it at the right dose, the treatment works the first time. That was in from March 2018 when I started the company. And that led to about October. And so I was at the University of Minnesota. And to make a long story short, I convinced the chair of the department there of dermatology to let me treat these ladies who had this incurable hair disease. And they looked like they had mange. Yeah. It was awful. And to make a long story short, I said, and she had tried PRP and she had access to lasers and robots and anything that she wanted. I said, well, you haven't done this. After 30 days after the first treatment, unexpectedly, these women were growing hair. These 3 women were growing hair. It became such a shock to them that they all freaked out and they were all rushing into the little surgical suite. They couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. So they looked at me and said, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, let's treat them again. Why would you not? So they did it again. That went on for about 2 or 3 more treatments. And these women were getting haircuts for the first time in over a decade. Their hair was growing in color. Their hair was growing, period. This gets to the point to this kind of like wraps your whole question. And I was sitting in the airport and I was thinking to myself, this is not possible. This is not possible what we're doing, that these women are growing hair. Yes, I know that PRP can make your hair grow, but these women had an autoinflammatory, autoimmune condition. This conceivably goes against everything we know what platelets can potentially do. And that's when kind of the divine inspiration happened to me again. I was literally, I guess, downloaded with the idea of, hey, let's ratchet up the dose and inject this intravenously. And maybe that will help my 5th child who became vaccine injured. Because at the time, just like every autistic mom, just like every mom who's trying to go to the ends of the earth to seek a therapy for their child, she was no different. She is the test pilot for everything that they will, potentially give to their kid. If it helps them, the mom, they'll give it to the kid. And so I called my wife and I said, I have an idea. I think if we jack the dose up and we do this to you intravenously, I think it's going to turn your brain on. And I think it's going to heal Andrew. And she says to me, okay, well, what will my dad say? And her dad is a doctor.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I said, A, he's going to be completely against the idea.
Yeah.
Because if this was bone marrow cells, if this was umbilical cord cells, and I said do it intravenously, no problem. But we're talking about platelets, which you said earlier that what do platelets do?
Well, we've been conditioned that they help us clot.
That's right. And that's all we've been taught. I said, your dad will be completely against this. And he'll also say it'll probably hurt you really bad on the spot. It'll, really bad. She's like, okay.
Like you're saying hurt as in pain through the injection because of the high intensity concentration of the platelets or something else?
Something else. If I was to tell you, I'm going to stick billions and billions of platelets back into your bloodstream.
Okay.
What's the first idea that's going to come to your mind? What would happen?
I would think I would completely clot.
There you go.
My whole system would clot. Yeah.
There you go. And I said, no, it won't. Actually, I know it won't.
And how did you know that, Tapley?
That kind of goes into the dream.
Yeah.
That kind of goes into the dream because at this time I had built up a lot of credibility with my wife where I had gone on these kind of missions of serving. I can't tell you, I can't explain it to you, but I would be called, hey, here's a guy, here's a kid who's quadriplegic. And I'd get there and somehow I would know the answer. And it would happen to another kid who was quadriplegic, and then a guy with ALS, and a woman who couldn't have children. And so I had to go through a series of events that really, I didn't even know why I was being summoned to call. But when I got to the situation, I knew exactly what to do.
That's emotional, huh? Yeah, it's a beautiful gift.
And so when she said, and so at this point, I had been used to create these miracles of these quadriplegic kids walking, and not just walking, but walking like me and you. A woman who couldn't have kids, and now she has two. A guy who had ALS, it was terminal, and 2 weeks later, he was shooting baskets. So I called my wife and I said, I think if we stick this into your vein and we ratchet up the dose, I think this will heal Andrew. And so that's how I knew. I just knew. And so she was going to go along with it because I had those kind of experiences under my belt.
Yeah.
So when I got home, I had to lay the evidence out in front of him as to why this would not spontaneously make his daughter stroke out.
Your father-in-law. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have 2 clotting disorders. Like, I'm like, oh, I get it. Yeah.
He might not say this now, but I remember he reluctantly did it. The next morning, it did exactly what I thought it would do. She comes out of our bedroom and she has her hands on her head and she's saying, I don't know what this is, but my brain is operating at a pace that my mouth can't even keep up with. I've got these thoughts in my head, and not bad thoughts, but her mind, her brain had been just turned on.
Yeah.
The tinnitus in her ear went away. The vision cleared up immediately because she had blurry vision. The whites of her eyes detoxed. I mean, all these things started happening to her over the course of 2 or 3 week period that were literally unexplainable.
After 1 dose.
Right.
And at this point, you didn't have the software created to create a customized dose for your wife. You just said, trust me, I love this. Good wife. We're just going to jack this up, like you said, which I hate that word from a scientific perspective. I'm like, oh my God, you just said jack up the dose. I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, but so you didn't have any of the software or the data at this point to give her a customized dose. You just said, let's do this, honey. Love you.
And she was on board because again, she was the autism warrior mom.
Yeah.
And I trust you. If you made the quadriplegic guy walk, right. If you made that guy walk, if this guy is shooting baskets, why wouldn't this work? And again, this was, if we want to go back to the whole thing, is that, I can't honestly say that I can take credit for the inspiration. So there was a lot of that to say, listen, it's not my idea.
Mm-hmm.
I just think we should do it.
Yep. Divine intervention. Divine intervention.
So yeah, you're right. So there was no customized dose for the IV therapy at this point. She was ground zero. She was patient number one.
How long before you introduced it to your son?
Well, at this point, after I did my wife, even though these things were happening to her, it didn't even dawn on me yet until patient number two was my second child. She was 11 at the time. She played high-level athletics, and she had this chronic ankle injury, and I just got sick and tired of dealing with it. Took it to a friend of mine. I said, I need you to, I'm going to give her the ankle dose. I'm going to fix her ankle. And there was a lot left over of the treatment. So I said, put it in her arm. He goes, man, I can't do that. I said, just do it.
Dude, Tapley, you're kind of freaking me out right now. All right, go ahead. As you're like, giggle, giggle.
And so he did. And that my second child was very creative, very smart at math, struggled at reading, very disorganized. If she's going to listen to this one day, I hope she doesn't get mad at me, but that's
You're
her.
describing me.
I mean, she's a ton of fun. It's just, she just struggled at reading. And I think looking back, she's borderline dyslexic. We gave it to her, and then that was in like July, and then in school started, a month or two later, and she had come home one day, and her ankle got fixed like immediately within 24 to 72 hours. She was, not only did it fix it, but it was her non-dominant foot, and that foot ended up becoming her more dominant foot at soccer. Not to mention that she just grew like a weed. She just grew.
And this was in her ankle, but then you gave her the IV of it.
Then I gave her the IV.
Okay, so but this is like same day.
Same day.
Slam bam, thank you, ma'am. Holy jeez. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And she wasn't, there was no expectation that it was going to do anything to her. I was just trying to make sure the treatment didn't go to waste, to be honest with you. And I also knew that there was an idea that it might help her, but there was no expectation of me that this is what it was going to do.
Okay, hold on. Had you done it to yourself yet?
No.
Dude, okay, why are you giving this to your family members and you haven't put it in you yet? Has anyone asked you that question?
Oh, yeah. My wife wouldn't let me do it for we had treated probably 500-600 patients in 2 years, and my wife still hadn't let me do it to myself yet.
Because she didn't want you to go crazy with your brain.
Well, that's right. That's exactly.
I can't have him any higher than where he is. Okay.
She was like, we just started this company. We've invested all this into it. This is why we were put on this earth. This is our mission, and I can't have you going down. So I'm like, despite all these miracles that we were seeing over 2 years, I'm like, just let me do it.
So she was still, at this point, she was still anxious about some of the long-term side effects. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think she was more just concerned of the fact that she's an autism mom and the unknown. Mm-hmm. The unknown. What if, right? It's helped 500 straight people, but what if I'm the one person that something bad happens to? And this was our whole life that was put into this mission.
Sure.
I mean, today I get the treatment every 8 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
But at the time, if I had to be honest, she wouldn't let me do it.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to my daughter, she did the treatment. Oh, and on a random, I don't know, Tuesday coming home from school, she had to get something signed, like a parent form. And I said, hey, where's the form? It's in my backpack. I reached into her backpack, expecting something to be crumpled, to be messy. She was that kid. It was anything but that. It was filed. It was color coded. This wasn't my kid's backpack. Everything was pressed and neat. No dog-eared corners.
Okay, I got to stop you for a second. So this doesn't make any sense. So what you're basically, it makes perfect sense, but it makes no sense. What you're basically saying is, I gave my 11-year-old a dose for her physical being. And what you're telling me is her social kind of relation to the world was also affected.
Yeah.
So this makes no sense. So let's talk science. Like, why is this stuff happening? What are these platelets doing to the neural connections in the brain?
So if you look at it, you can find evidence going back to the 1900s, almost pre-1900s, that they knew that something was important about the platelet. They just didn't have the technology to describe it or even know what that is. But platelets are circulating the bloodstream looking to do two things: identify things that need to be repaired and identify things that needed to not be in our body. So that's our repair system and then our immune system. And whenever it comes in contact with, say, something that needs to be repaired, the platelet is the one thing that initiates the cascade of events that our body undergoes to heal anything and everything. Period. End of story. Whether it's a brain injury, a paper cut, you have dyslexia, you get cancer. If you think about it, how many platelets in the bloodstream compared to, say, a white blood cell?
I don't know.
We have very few white blood cells, and we have hundreds of thousands of platelets.
Okay.
And so if you go to, say, the immune system, when the platelet comes in contact with a virus, a mold, a bacteria, it will initiate our immune system to begin. Our white blood cells don't even know what to do until the platelet says, this is what I've come in contact with. This is what it's doing to the body. This is how it's hurt the body. I got my foot on its throat right now. I need your help. I need 5 of you. And this is what I need you to do.
He says, come on, white blood cells. Now you do what I'm telling you to do.
That's exactly right. And there's an information exchange right there between the platelets and the white blood cells. It's freaking really cool. Let me give you an example. If the platelet comes in contact with a herpes virus, it will surround it and it will launch these fire bombs and weapons at it to blow up pieces of the DNA, of the herpes DNA. And it'll collect that evidence while it's simultaneously saying, white blood cells, come right now. Okay, that's how our immune system initiates. Our white blood cells go on the attack, and then they beat the herpes virus to the best they can. And now it's time for the white blood cells to develop antibodies to remember how to defend against it in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess where they learn the instructions? The
platelets.
It comes back around and it hands that DNA evidence off to the herpes virus and says, this is what it did to us. This is how you defeat it. This is what it'll try again, how to defeat us in the future. And this is how you develop antibodies and how to fortify our defenses. And then after it hands that evidence off, the body selects the platelet for removal and our bone marrow spins up another one.
Okay. So
our platelets, I would argue, are the most important thing circulating the bloodstream. So when everything's fine, when I have complete health, think of your cells in your body like houses in a neighborhood. The garages are open, the lights are on, kids are riding in the street. Your body is experiencing health and vitality. Cells are talking back and forth to one another and exchanging information. If I have a virus come into my body, into the neighborhood, the first 2 houses on the neighborhood, they get ransacked, but they send out the Facebook message that says, oh God, shut down. And so your cells shut down their garages. They turn the lights off, and the cells shut down communication with one another. And they shut down oxygen consumption, and they shut down energy consumption because they don't want a virus to get inside of them and get a hold of like valuable material. Right?
Yeah, lock that shit down, Tapley.
You got to lock it down. So guess who's the conduit of the information exchange between all these cells that have shut their communication down?
I'm guessing the platelets. Okay. Now, also platelets are smart, right? So they go in and they say, I'm going to tackle the thing that needs me the most first.
Okay. So that's what I've kind of figured out. Well, once I saw what it did to my daughter, that's when I kind of said, oh my gosh, if this is doing what I think it's doing, we may have just stumbled on Pandora's box.
Yeah. I
shut my company down for about 1.5 years. And I don't know how these patients started coming to my father-in-law's office, but they did. And I honestly can't tell you, certain people come into your life at certain times. I had certain people come in that said, I support what you're doing. I know it's going to be great. Hey, by the way, can I help my friend? She's got lupus. I'm like, maybe, sure. And so just those kind of connections, about 150 people came to my father-in-law's office in about 1.5 years, from lupus to chronic kidney disease, to end-stage liver disease, to fibromyalgia, to Parkinson's. I mean, you name it, we treated it. From kids to you're 89 years old. We were giving the IV treatment. And these conditions were not only getting better, but they were reversing.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your bio.
Reversing. And I can say that because when you have a multifactorial disease, let's say like lupus, hey, I have lupus, but I also have rheumatoid arthritis and Hashimoto's. Okay, well, what's driving which? In conventional medicine, I can measure, let's say, the blood and say, oh, the pancreas is affected, the thyroid's affected, and then what do? We give a medication, right? Well, the body knows the pancreas is off. The body knows the thyroid's off. So what I had patients do is I said, I need you to start writing journals. This is how I am. This is the medications I take. And I want you to progressively write, because I didn't know anything. I want you to write how you're healing. And after I collected all those journals, it painted a real clear picture of how people's bodies were reversing and healing backwards. And obviously the order in which the body selectively chose to turn their body off, and which led to their specific condition. That's the only thing that could explain it. The only thing. And then the software was also learning this dose to outcome relationship. You plug in what happened to you, you plug in the dose given, boom, you have a dose to outcome relationship.
If I understand this correctly, because I have done a little research, you take blood initially when you get a patient into the office. Now, mind you, of course, my clinical research brain is going apeshit crazy right now. Like I'm thinking like, what's the FDA doing? What's the long-term efficacy? Have we done any long-term data? I've got all of that. However, we're going to go back really quickly before I ask you my question to talk about this is your own blood going back into you. This is your own stuff. You're not adding things. So let's go through the process. So a child or a patient comes in, you prick their finger or you take some blood out of an IV port, and then you spin the blood and identify the percentage of platelets within the blood at that moment. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. That's a really simplified version.
That trust me, people are like, give me the elevator pitch. And I'm like, it's hard for me to do that.
Right. Well, of course, because you're in it. You're living and breathing it. So then when you come to a true dose, then you're actually taking that percentage. Because if I understand this correctly, platelet levels change within every person throughout their existence. So it's never, your platelet levels are not going to be the same as my platelet levels, which is what you're getting at when it comes to the true dose concept, correct? You're basically saying, now I know how many platelets are in your system. Now or in your blood currently. Now I'm going to take that along with the condition that you have, whether or not it's a neurological condition. I want to talk to you about chromosome conditions and things like that as well, like Alzheimer's. Have you looked at all this stuff? Oh God, there's so many questions. Okay. So I know my head's going to explode. So you then plug it into the software that you have patented and it spits out. That's the technical term for it. It spits out the very specific concentration of platelets that you will then administer back into the blood.
Boom. You said it.
Okay. See, I've done my research.
Actually, I need to record this, like the last little spiel of what you just said, because that just said it perfectly.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yes, I am amazing. Think of what's going to happen when I get my first dose. Holy God, my husband's going to divorce me. He's going to be like, I can't handle that brain going any faster. So let's talk. I first want to ask you really quickly, and I somewhat know the answer, but I do want to know side effects. And that's just my clinical background saying you have got to find out who's lost an arm or had a heart attack, or have you looked at long-term effects? I know what the answer is.
There's none.
I know.
Think about it. It's your own blood. The people are going to say, well, we're approaching we're getting close to our 10,000th patient. If anything bad would have happened by now, I would have known.
Well, and you would have been shut down, I would imagine.
I would have been and then some.
Yeah. Sued. Yeah. So, that's what's really tricky for me. Like I mentioned, my background's in clinical research. Hello. There are reasons that we do all of this.
So let me explain to you a simple reason as to how this therapy is doing what it's doing. Okay. Because you're talking about side effects. Platelets have these paradoxical properties. They clot when they need to. They don't clot when they need to. They stimulate inflammation when it's needed. They downregulate it when the body doesn't need it. They interact with white blood cells when they need to exchange information. They get rid of them when they don't. For a herpes virus, they surround it. But if it's an HIV virus, they swallow it and have the white blood cells swallow it. If it's a bacteria, they do something completely different. Let's take serotonin. Your platelets carry around 95% of your body's manufactured serotonin. Now think about this. The platelets don't manufacture it, right? It's a hormone.
Yeah.
Why would God choose the platelet as the one thing to carry around 95% of it? Because when serotonin is needed for, say, something like liver regeneration, the platelet's right there as the first responder to say, here, I have a package of something that you need. Or something like brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Guess what that's used for? That's used for remyelination and nerve growth.
Yes.
99% of it is carried around, and guess what? Your platelet.
Yeah, I'm learning. There's
a great paper if anybody listening wants to read, and it's one of my favorite because it's written by some researchers called Lee et al. LIET.al. And the title is basically autonomous drones, platelets as autonomous drones circulating the bloodstream. And they kind of create an analogy of platelets as drones. And I think about drones.
Yeah.
They can be manufactured quickly. They're carrying around all the weapons you need at any one given time. They're carrying around all the repair cargo needed at any given time. They're small and undetectable. So viruses don't want anything about it. There's no nucleus to a platelet, so there's nothing desirable that a virus wants or a bacteria. There's nothing to take over. And if one happens to get killed, the body just spins one up again. Let me just pull this quote up real quick.
Okay.
I want to read something to you. You ready for this?
Yeah, I'm moving my 12 o'clock. Hold on.
What's that?
I said, I'm moving my 12 o'clock. Hold on.
Are we going over?
Oh, yeah, of course we are. But we haven't even started talking about who this affects and how this affects and the testimonials. So shoot, we're going to have to bring you back. Okay, read me the quote.
In many diseases, substances are formed which act as either irritants or poisons to the platelet-forming organs. And depending on the intensity of their action, may exert their influence either to increase the platelet count or reduce it. Guess when that paper was written? 1915.
1915.
15. So our platelets are not just changing from person to person. They're changing based on what's happening to us at that given moment.
Right.
Okay. And our body, if it needs weapons like a virus, the body will spin up platelets armed with weapons to the teeth out of our bone marrow. If our body has a neurological injury like CP, it'll spin up platelets carrying around things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor or VEGF, which is needed for new blood vessel growth. You see where I'm getting at? And so
I do. Go ahead.
And so to put a bow on this, when we have all these conditions that are autoimmune, that are chronic, that are inflammatory, even things like CP, the body is consistently trying to heal itself. It is. The problem is that it doesn't have the material or the information to finish the loop of repair or immune clearance that it needs to complete. The platelet,
because it's working off of injured information. Is that correct?
That's you know what? That's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
Good.
It's working off old information.
Yeah, it's injured old information. I mean, there's a reason that this child has CP. Their brain was injured. And if the platelets are continuing to work from that information, how can they ever truly heal?
That's a great way to put it. I really love that. I'm going to steal that from you because
perfect.
Because at the time that the brain was injured, let's take CP, in utero, the body tried to respond right then and there. The injury either was so severe, maybe it didn't have the information, maybe it had other problems to deal with downstream, that it tried to heal it as best it could. At some point, the body has to cut its losses, and it has to it coexists with the injury, and it coexists with the virus. So the body will develop a workaround. So there you go. It's stuck in this loop of dealing with old information. Mm-hmm. When you take it out of the body and it's not being stimulated by anything anymore, and you do it at the right dose and you give it back, into your vein, that information is reset. It's now has fresh eyes on the whole picture.
See, now that's where I just don't get it.
The technical term is called repair recognition and immune recognition.
Okay.
And what that is that the way I describe it is there's three ways I can answer this question because there's no evidence on this, but I'm going to tell you how it works. Immune recognition or repair recognition is pretend you live in a moldy house, but you don't know that it's moldy because you live there. You go to the beach for 2 weeks and you come back and you're like, oh my God, what does that smell? That's immune recognition. Okay. So that's being reset. The second thing is that when you take this out and at any given moment, your body is managing ratios of health, ratios of white blood cells to red blood cells to platelets to different hormones to different transmitters. And so it's constantly adjusting those things based on what's happening to you. Does it make sense? It's adjusting the ratio.
Yes. I mean, it's a closed circuit. I mean, it's like the ratio has to always equate to 100% of the closed circuit, correct?
There you go. Yes.
Okay.
This is not a concept I'm making up. This goes all the way to the ancient Greeks. But we're talking about cells and the hemodynamic system in the bloodstream. Guess who is controlling the ratios of all these things and monitoring the platelet? So if something happens to you 5 minutes from now, it's gonna make one thing raise and another thing lower. To the body, that's normal. To say a blood test in conventional medicine, they're like, that's bad. We got to do something to you. But the body already knows it. You don't need to give it a medication. Mm-hmm. So when we take the blood out and we remove components of it in the centrifugation process, nothing fancy, nothing crazy, and then we give you back billions and billions of platelets, and I give that back into your bloodstream. Number one, your body has already remanufactured those platelets in that 30-minute process. You get the blood taken out, it's being processed, you're sitting there watching TV. Your body has already reproduced that amount you just lost. You put a super crazy high concentration dose back in the body, and now you've just hemodynamically altered the physiological ratio of platelets compared to everything else.
You jacked it up. The body says, I've got to work myself back down to that ratio of health that I'm currently at right now, that I'm maintaining, that 100% loop, because now you just gave me 100% plus to use your. Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I've got to work myself back down to 100%.
So that's why you have a longevity of dose. That's why you have 3 months before you have to get another dose. Is that correct?
That's a great way to think about it because it's going to continually keep doing these effects to you until it works itself back down to that 100% you just described.
Correct. And so if you have a chronic disease, then it is going to take more than one dose, probably. But if you have joint pain in your knee, might get fixed with one dose.
Yeah. And let me show you something because this is important. This is your repair system, your immune system. You see this? See these loops right here?
Yeah.
Now, this is the order of events your body undergoes to repair things. And this is the order of events your body undergoes to clear things out. And so when your body injures itself, it's going to go through this step to this step to this step. Mm-hmm. And then once it completes this whole cycle, then you'll enter the sleep cycle for that particular injury. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
But what happens if our body doesn't have the information it needs? What happens is it'll get stuck at whatever step it's at
and start over.
No, it'll stay perpetually stuck there until it has what it needs. It'll stay stuck there because the body will not let it progress forward. So you're stuck in this feedback loop, stuck at whatever step. It could be step 1, step 2, step 3, but your body will not let it progress forward. Same thing with your immune system. Okay.
And your image is showing, let's say we put a 1 at the top, a 1 to 2, 2 to 3. Then you have an arrow going from 3 back to 1. And so is that purposeful where you're kind of saying there's that inflammatory loop or there's that repair loop that the body, kind of like what we were talking about, the platelets only have the information that they have to help. And if you're just continually in that loop, they can't progress. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's right. It won't. And so this is the definition right here graphically of inflammation. This is chronic inflammation. This is a graphic of systemic inflammation. It's simply start stacking several of these unresolved events, unresolved repairs, unresolved immune clearances on top of one another. You start stacking on top of one another over a lifetime, and this is how you acquire systemic inflammation. Basically, unresolved feedback loop on top of unresolved feedback loop on top of it, and it leads to these inflammatory conditions, and then it progresses to something more serious, like these peripheral. This is where it starts. This is where it starts affecting the vasculature. It'll start to lead to other things in the body start to get affected.
So you're saying inflammatory, peripheral, neurological. It's the degradation of a body for injury. Okay.
That's right. That's exactly what this is. And as it progresses forward, this is how you go. This is how somebody has Hashimoto's, Crohn's disease, and then all of a sudden it keeps progressing, and now they end up with fibromyalgia. They have sensory issues. They have neurological decline, even depression right here, or mental health. It's not genetic. It's acquired.
I have friends that have children with very rare disorders, like mitochondrial disease. Are there certain conditions that you wouldn't use TruDOSE for?
No, there's not one. Because if you think about it, you're going to throw a disease at me to where I'm going to say, I have no idea. I have no idea. I've never treated that. But what you're asking me is that's how this all started. Person X has an incurable this. I have no idea. Try it. Now we have 9 of them. Person X has chronic kidney disease and he's getting a transplant. Now he's keeping it. So my point is that I'm under the belief that we were created, that our body is constantly trying to heal itself, even if it's genetically behind the 8 ball out of the mom's womb. I just believe that.
I would love to talk about testimonials and success stories and things that you've seen, because what you talked about in the beginning of hope, this almost sounds too good to be true. And I'm sure you've heard that from people. So I think hearing testimonials and talking to Elena or talking to you about the people, the patients that you've worked with and the moms and dads that you've worked with, I think it would be hugely beneficial for those that are thinking, is this too good to be true? And we're not talking $10,000 a dose, right, Tapley?
No. I've got all the clinics that use the technology and that do the therapy. We don't let anybody charge below a price of $1,500. And we also say, listen, you can't be charging anything over a couple thousand. These people need multiple treatments and they need help.
So that's very approachable. I spent $20,000 on Teal's surgery last summer.
Each time you reset the information and you exit yourself out of these feedback loops, because when the platelets go in there, they're saying, okay, I know the order in which I chose to break the body down. The body did. And I know the order in which I need to reverse your body. I'm going to do everything I can with this first treatment, but everything that I fix is done. It's fixed. And that is your new normal.
And so then when you do another dose, you're working off your new normal.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so it's very rare. I would say, I use the word rare because I don't want to say the word never, but it's very rare that nobody gets better after the first treatment. People not experiencing anything after a treatment, I just don't hear about it. I don't.
You say that you can feel it in the brain, that the kids will say, I can feel this working in my brain.
Oh my gosh. When I was collecting all the data in the journals and I was asking people, to tell me what you're feeling, and this, and then they say, I can feel it here and I can feel it going through my body. But the most common thing that people with no background, no capacity to explain what's happening to them, no scientific knowledge, they would say, it feels like it's rewiring my brain. And I got to hear that so many times to where that must be what's going on. And now I know it is, and can point to evidence that says, yes, that's what's going on.
And you do have data. I know you have a lot of videos on your website that show the data of how the brain is utilizing these new platelets.
The first CP patient that was treated was a guy who's in his 50s. So when you talk about neuroplasticity and the idea that our body can, we reach a certain age and our bodies are neurologically hardwired. That's not true. It's not true. The first guy we treated was in his 50s. His name was John. And sitting down, he looked normal. He talked about running a marathon. He talked about doing this, but then he stood up and started walking. I'm like, how did you do this? He said, I had overcome my disability. I had literally rewired and taught myself how to do things. And to make a long story short, and anybody who had a brain injury, we had them read and write. But he would not read. And I thought it's because he was embarrassed. It wasn't. It's because he couldn't track. His eyes couldn't track. And so he was a manager at a store, and he managed employees. And he told me when he gave presentations that he would memorize the information. And when he gave the presentation, he would basically act like he was giving it from the presentation, the PowerPoint, but he was basically memorizing it. And so 3 months later, he sends me his testimonial and what it's done to him, what it's done to his brain. And he says, number one, I now type my own things in my own reports, which I had to like pawn off to somebody else. And he said, I gave my first presentation. It was a COVID update for their department store. And I didn't memorize the information. I actually read it from the slides, and I did the whole thing myself. Now think about that. The guy's in his 50s, and you saw the kid who was 19. This kid was in a ball. His arms were so tight that they couldn't manually use physical force to wrench him open to give a blood draw. That he got constricted. As a matter of fact, the blood draw failed the first time because they simply couldn't get it. Second time, they did. And the moment that it was going into his arm, the moment, he was just kind of out of it and drooling, but the moment it went into his arm, he turns to the doctor, and he recognized her, and he smiled. And then he grabbed his mom's arm, and he looked at her, and he smiled at her for the first time. And on the way to the car, he gave her a kiss. Now, and you saw the video of him walking, going for the second treatment. Now he was walking assisted, but he was walking. But you saw it. Mm-hmm. Now what he does, he goes up and down the stairs. He's getting into mischief. He's watching TV.
He's 19. So this isn't like, it's not too late for anybody. Thank you, Tapley, for spending time with us. We will have you back. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. That'd be great.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found one or two meaningful nuggets of information to make your day better. If you think there's value in what we do, please take a moment to tell another friend, family member, or a caregiver. We'd love to hear from you at forourspecialkids@gmail.com. You can send in a question, a comment, a topic that you'd like to learn more about, or if you'd like us to highlight a certain person, please send that information to us. It makes our show so much better and so much more valuable for you. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is For Our Special Kids. And finally, remember to witness the wonder and the wisdom within yourself and others. Until next time.